Thanks, Chair. Mr. Armstrong, the way you would get time to write down the things that I want to hear, because I'll go to each one of you. The 20 million for the retrofit is down for the Midlands. It's ring fence for the Midlands. Can you write down or call it out? What are the Midlands, and if it's ring fenced in certain counties? Definition of the Midlands, or whatever counties is involved in it. You'll be able to get working on that. And in the recent judgment on the horticulture, I don't accept that the department is still looking at it, because that judgment is out 2 months. Are you bringing in new legislation in relation to peat in the private, because there's 3,000 to 4,000 jobs involved in it? In relation to, you talked about the social housing, that there was 80,000, I think, with refit done. Are you telling me that there's 80,000 houses that aren't using oil or gas at the moment? Because my understanding is that what you'd be referring to is maybe a bit of insulation, because I don't see them changing to air to water or anything like that. Just to confirm these things. That's from Mr. Armstrong. For Mr. Carroll, you spoke earlier on in your submission. You talked about Ireland reducing its climate, the greenhouse gas emissions, the tonnages in be it transport and all the different things. And this is a straight yes or no question, because I've done a bit of research on it. Bordemona or DSB closing those 2 plants does not reduce Ireland's emissions, because they are trading under the ETS system, on the European system. It will not change agriculture, it will not change transport, and it will not change energy when we add up our emissions in this country at the moment. Just I want that clarified. Second of all, the 5 million you referred to at the National Parks and Wildlife Service, are you referring to the 12 bogs that they are at around the country at the moment? Because that's already budgeted for, and that money actually came through the LIFE funding. Or is it 5 more million you are referring to? And in relation to that will be, that's okay with you, just to get those to DSB. When did the minister, or when did you inform the minister of the closures? And from what I understand, and can you confirm this, Mr. Dollard, that the workers involved, from what you are saying, you named out about 15 places between skills places and different depots, including a number of them in the west of Ireland. Are you stating that you will be able to redeploy all employees if they wish to do so? And I know that you'll be given an option if they want to take redundancy. But if they wish to do so, you, from what I understand you're saying there, you'll be able to redeploy them. Under the emissions, and I would like you to address this, there was credits given from Europe under the emissions for the tonnages that you were using. My understanding is you had to cut down on them as you're going along, but if ye stop in the end of 2020, we know that the credits that you have is worth €26 a tonne, because I spoke to you before that if you had to buy some, it was like 26.40 on the market. Is there going to be, on the tonnage you have, a large windfall of money if there's some other big conglomerate in some other part of Europe that will require credits? And just to give me that. And on top of that, in relation to the peat, how come under the same regulations Bordemona in their plant were able to get planning, and under the same regulations where we're using biomass and peat, ye couldn't have a second go at it? I note when you talked about, when the ASB talked about their reasoning, it was climate, commercial and planning. Where does social and economic come in for the people in rural parts of Ireland that you didn't take that into account in trying to help them? And for Mr. Donlan, tell me the number of employees you have full and part-time at the moment. I know that you have said you're able to redeploy 210. You said there'll be limited redundancies. Can you guarantee the rest of them for the next 7 years? You talked about new ideas. I understood when I met you 2 years ago, Mr. Donlan, you gave us a lovely glossy document in here and you told us how 2025, 2027. I know things has changed, but can you give a clear path to the rest of those workers that are out there in relation to restoration. I think everyone in this committee needs to get real about restoration. 5 million does about 17 diggers, 240 days. That's the national park statistics. There are some bogs of Borden and Mona, and I think we need to be realistic about this. That you couldn't restore Deputy. For the simple reason they're going beyond restoring the degraded raised bog. And I think people are codding themselves about a lot of
Thank
this.
you. I'm going to have to bring in short in time, so we'll start with the ESBs. Mr. Dollard.
Deputy, thanks for the questions. I'll take the questions in sequence if I can. You asked me did we inform the Minister. We informed the Minister the day before the decision was made. In terms of workers involved, you asked would we be capable of reassigning all the people who expressed it. Yes is the answer to that.
That's good.
Okay, that's what we'd expect. And, you know, as I said to you earlier, there will be strong, I'd say, interest in being reassigned. You know, that's what I expect to see. In terms of the planning sites, you talk about social economic consideration, where they take into account. Like, I suppose we as an industry are going through a massive transition ourselves. And, you know, right across Europe, all of the energy players are going through a massive transition. Our business is going through a massive transition. Our aspiration was, we saw those plants as really important to us going forward in terms of our future, but also in terms of generating income into the economy. And I suppose we understood the social and economic considerations that are there, I suppose, having operated into the site. The reality of it is, though, mindful of that, and we are really disappointed. We put a lot of effort into that planning application. Notwithstanding that, we cannot see how, based on the planning, the commercial and the climate, there is any way around this. Effectively, those plants, they don't have any further future. And I don't say that with anything other than regret.
Can you go on I wasn't about the funding, the emissions, or the
carbon. Yeah. The carbon. So, a number of years ago, companies like ESB were given carbon allowances free, okay? That stopped, Deputy, I don't have the exact number of years, but a number of years ago, say 5, 6 years ago, off the top of my head, Chairman, I'm guessing, right? Now when we sell electricity forward in the market, we have to buy carbon in the market ourselves. We don't hold allowances. There will be no windfall gain to ESB whatsoever in terms of carbon.
What will be the saving?
There will be no saving.
If you're buying forward, there has to be a saving.
Well, we will produce the electricity in other plants, so we'll still consume carbon. So
you won't be buying the carbon. You won't be buying the carbon credits.
We may not be, okay, but we won't be selling. So
what's the saving?
But you won't be selling the electricity, Deputy, either.
You'll be selling the electricity because you'll be generating in a different way. What's the saving if you're not buying the carbon credit?
The answer to your question is there'll be no saving, because effectively all the plants compete and there's a margin. You're competing at a margin. So one plant is competing against the other in the market, against our competitors as well. So I would expect no saving.
I'm going to bring in Mr. Carroll from the Department. Yep.
Deputy, 2 questions.
Yep.
In terms of, I suppose, the closing of the peat plants, on an economy-wide basis, they will reduce our emissions. The estimate is 1.25 million tonnes of carbon will be saved each year, and emissions will reduce by 9 million tonnes cumulatively up to 2027. So on an economy-wide basis.
I asked about our targets. Is it included in our targets? It's not, because I've seen the question already. You've answered.
The Climate Action Plan actually commits, I think there's a distinction to be drawn between how EU targets are framed and an economy-wide approach to decarbonising. In terms of the EU regime, it's divided into 2 sectors, the ETS, which is a cap and trade, yes, where electricity falls, and the non-ETS, which covers other sectors. But you know, it wouldn't be correct to say it doesn't reduce on an economy-wide basis our emissions. It does in terms of
Ireland's targets. Let's make it simpler. Ireland's targets under agriculture, energy and transport. It has no bearing on that, correct?
Well, it has a bearing on I mean, the decarbonisation of our energy system. It obviously doesn't have a bearing on agricultural targets, but it does have a bearing on the decarbonisation of our energy system. The ETS is an EU-wide policy mechanism to reduce emissions in large industry and in electricity generation. And in terms of the overall, the EU has a target to reduce emissions in the ETS system, and it does contribute to that, and it does reduce emissions on an economy-wide basis in Ireland.
Yeah.
Okay, we're really running out of time here in this. Board Namona, really. I think it had your questions.
I suppose that was the most pertinent question. We have about 1,600 employees. About 400 of those are seasonal. About half of those 1,600 are in non-peat related businesses. They're totally not affected by anything to do with peat. About 400 are affected by the closure of the 2 power stations, and we are redeploying 210 of those to rehabilitation and some of them to other new businesses, and we've opened a voluntary scheme and we're targeting between 150 and 180. But if we don't get 150, 180, we'll redeploy the rest. But we're oversubscribed on that.
Yeah.
For the Midlands retrofishing project has been developed by the retrofishing task force. The final boundaries or areas that are going to be included hasn't been finally decided yet, so I can't.
So it's not decided.
It hasn't. Yeah, it hasn't been finally defined at this stage. With regards to the bogs, there has been some work done with the Department of Climate Action and Department of Housing in this area. My understanding is that further advice is required from the Attorney General's office to progress it further. That's all the details I have at the moment.
So are you saying to me that we don't know what the Midlands, even though it's announced, what the Midlands Transition Fund is, what we're calling the Midlands?
We know what the core counties are likely to be, but the full scope of the area hasn't been decided. The final boundary will be decided based on the economic stimulus required for the region and the clusters of houses that will be identified to put together. But I think at this stage, to identify exactly what those counties are, it hasn't been finalised by the committee, by the task force.
Deputy Nocton.
Thanks,
Chair.